1948. Did you know this? The Truman administration, the post-Roosevelt administration, and all the countries that were being rebuilt after World War II, in Britain and France and West Germany, the government was creating a national health service, providing people with health care. Harry Truman thought they ought to do that for the United States as well. And I remember reading articles from the New York Times during the Obamacare debate showing how racism had been the main barrier to preventing the creation of a national health care service. The Democrats were ready to set up a national health care service, and racism was the issue. The South said the only way we can have a national health care service is you got to have a black hospital and a white hospital. The only way we're going to have a national health care service is if we have separate facilities. The Northern government, they weren't going to agree to that. And it was actually race and racism that killed national health insurance, the health insurance bill of the Truman administration. There's New York Times articles about this. It was the South, the Dixiecrats, when it couldn't be guaranteed to them. When it couldn't be guaranteed to the Dixiecrats, the segregationists, that they would get separate hospitals. The government would build two hospitals, a black one and a white one. And they wouldn't be able to have whites only signs at their hospitals. They got rid of it. They wouldn't vote for it. And national health insurance died. Remember, that was an important thing. And I remember reading Nelson Peery explaining that it was a division in the ruling class that created the civil rights movement. The communists had been protesting for equality for a long time. They'd been marching for the Scottsboro Nine. They built the Civil Rights Congress. They called for equal rights for African Americans. But the ruling class started to move on the issue of race. The Montgomery bus boycott, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that came from the ruling class. The ruling class was very afraid that the black people of the United States would become communists because the Soviet Union was their friend and the U.S. society clearly wasn't. The ruling class of the United States was very afraid of losing control. And they were also very, very unhappy with the amount of power that the segregationists of the South had. On top of that, they weren't happy with the Soviet Union humiliating them around the world. And so the Kennedy family and a lot of Northern Democratic Party liberals started talking about civil rights in the mid-50s because there was a division in the ruling class. This is all very important to understand. It was a division within the ruling class that gave birth to the modern civil rights movement. The Communist Party and black people themselves had been fighting and resisting. But it wasn't until a section of the ruling class said, okay, we're going to do something about this. That's when the modern civil rights movement really began. And the modern civil rights movement got going 1954, 1955. It continued. The protests, the sit-ins, the civil disobedience. But they lost control of it. They lost control of it. It's very clear the ruling class lost control of it. And many people point out that the reason Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was constantly espousing nonviolence, I don't know what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. personally believed. I assume that he was completely sincere in everything that he said, but part of the main reason that he constantly was saying he was a pacifist, that he did not believe in violence, was because there was a huge amount of fear of some kind of black revolt. And that many white Americans feared there would be mass vengeance killings. And that was what motivated many white Americans to oppose the civil rights movement. As they said, They knew in their bones all the evil things that had been done to black people. And they were very afraid that if the black people started organizing, the next thing you know, they were going to kill all the white people. And so with Dr. Martin Luther King at the top of his lungs saying, we don't believe in violence, we don't believe in vengeance, turn the other cheek, that was really, really necessary to prevent the civil rights movement from just being completely smashed from the beginning. That if Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been saying anything but that, the white power structure and the ruling class would have been united in crushing it. It was necessary because there was a real fear of payback, on the part of the black community. The black community was going to take vengeance for the years of lynching and segregation and torture and economic oppression. And I mean, that's very interesting as well. There was a lot of civil rights leaders who got murdered. Medgar Evers, church bombings. But then we understand that in Monroe, North Carolina, there was a chapter of the NAACP led by Robert F. Williams. And Robert F. Williams was protesting against the segregation of the swimming pool. The city swimming pool that all the residents paid for with their tax dollars was being denied access to black people. And they said, well, this isn't fair. We pay taxes just like everyone else. We pay for this swimming pool, but because we're black, we're not allowed to swim in it. So they started protesting at the swimming pool, having a protest. The Ku Klux Klan was particularly upset about the idea of blacks and whites swimming together. And this is interesting. There's a context to this that I did not know, but apparently even today, a lot of very conservative Southern Baptists don't believe in what they call mixed swimming. They don't believe in different genders swimming together. You go to a really conservative fundamental Baptist high school, they'll have if there's a pool there, they'll have a day for the boys in the pool, and then they'll have another day for the girls in the pool. That even up to today, a lot of very conservative religious folks do not believe that men and women should be swimming in the same swimming pool. It's interesting. That women in bathing suits is a sexually arousing thing to men. And that a lot of very and Muslims too, right? In the Muslim world, men and women do not swim in the same swimming pools because the way women are clad when they are swimming is very sexually arousing to a man. It's interesting. So the idea of black men and white men and black women and white women swimming in the same swimming pool was something the Ku Klux Klan was just horrified by. The idea of interracial marriage, interracial dating. So the idea that these people of different races would be together in the same swimming pool just drove the Klan up the wall. And so they shot at them. They were having their protest outside the swimming pool, demanding that the Civil Rights Act be enforced. And the Klan drove up and shot at them. They were being shot at. Their rallies would be broken up by gunfire. So what did Robert F. Williams do? Robert F. Williams, you can read his Wikipedia page, very famous individual. He and his fellow members of the NAACP of Monroe, North Carolina, they decided that they ought to join the National Rifle Association. They joined the NRA. They became legal Second Amendment practitioners. They became legal gun owners. And at their next protest at the swimming pool in Monroe, North Carolina, they were packing heat. They brought their own guns, and they did gun training courses, and they trained all these black ministers in how to use firearms. So the next protest they had at the swimming pool, they were there with their rifles. And the Klan showed up and shot back at them, and they shot back. And the Klan ran away, and they had their protest. Eventually, the Klan, I believe that they went to Robert F. Williams' house, if I'm not mistaken. There was a shootout. A couple Klansmen got killed. So Robert F. Williams had to flee the country because he was, tried for murder because he got into a shootout with the Ku Klux Klan. So where did he go? Where did Robert F. Williams go? I'm going to pull up the picture. Right? That's the great thing about StreamYard is I can show you all pictures. Right? I will show you where Robert F. Williams went. It's a wild story. This is where Robert F. Williams went. I hope it's big enough on the screen. Hope it's big enough on the screen. I can probably find a bigger version of this picture, but we'll try this one. But this is where Robert F. Williams went. Yeah, that's not a very good version of that picture. But that's Robert F. Williams with Mao. I'm going to try to find a better version of that picture. Hold on. That's way too small. Yeah, here we go. Much better version of the picture. All right. All righty. But this is really important history. This is very, 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 very important history. That's Robert F. Williams of Monroe, North Carolina, with Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. He's signing his little red book for him. When Robert F. Williams had to flee the United States, Mao, the leader of Communist China, invited him to China. And at his request, Mao wrote a statement supporting the civil rights movement in America. Here, I'll link it in the chat. Mao wrote a statement. This is Mao Zedong. Statement supporting the American Negroes in their just struggle against racial discrimination by U.S. imperialism. This is an official statement from Mao Zedong supporting the black people of America in their struggle against the American government. This is an official statement. Robert F. Williams was not preaching turn the other cheek. Robert F. Williams was preaching the right of armed self-defense. That's what Robert F. Williams was preaching. And Martin Luther King Jr. may have opened the door, but Robert F. Williams was able to walk through it. And Robert F. Williams didn't just go to China. He went to Cuba. And Robert F. Williams eventually started something called Radio Free Dixie. You know why they hate foreign media so much? They're constantly trying to inoculate you and tell you not to listen to Russian media or Chinese media or press TV from Iran. Do you know why? Because they remember Radio Free Dixie. Go and read about Radio Free Dixie. This was a program broadcasted from Cuba by Robert F. Williams. And from Cuba, he was urging the black people of America to rise up against American capitalism. You can read the Wikipedia page about Radio Free Dixie. And that, yes, the civil rights movement may have started as a division within the ruling class, but after a while, they lost control of it. And it gave rise to a much bigger movement called the Black Liberation Movement. For the people who listened to Radio Free Dixie, there were fans of Radio Free Dixie that listened to Robert F. Williams' broadcasts from Cuba calling for a communist revolution, quoting Mao, etc. The people who listened to those radio broadcasts, they organized a group called the Revolutionary Action Movement, the RAM. And it was mainly people that were part of a civil rights group that had worked with Dr. Martin Luther King called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They started a secret organization called Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM. RAM was people who listened to Radio Free Dixie and people who worked in the civil rights movement who wanted to form a new black liberation-oriented communist party. It was a secret organization. It was not public. It was underground. Malcolm X met with them. They were a revolutionary organization. RAM, Revolutionary Action Movement. They were the beginning of what you might call the new communist movement. They wanted to form a new communist party that was aligned with China. They thought CPUSA was too reformist, too revisionist. They had the Revolutionary Action Movement. And it was two members of the Revolutionary Action Movement, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, who eventually started the Black Panthers. They felt that they didn't like the Revolutionary Action Movement. It wasn't exciting enough. So they had the idea to do the Black Panthers. So the Black Panthers came out of the Revolutionary Action Movement. We all know about the Black Panthers and their history. So it's interesting to see how these things develop over the course of time. Started out as a division within the ruling class. They lost control of it. And even in the final years of his life, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was condemning capitalism. Bet you didn't know that. In his final years of his life, Martin Luther King Jr. said that capitalism was no good. And actually, I have here, that's one of the good things about our Jesus is a Socialist book. We didn't just include quotes from the Bible. We did. We did. But we also included quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm going to read to you what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said about capitalism. These are quotes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on socialism. He said, call it democracy or call it democratic socialism. There must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children. That's speech to the Negro American Labor Council, 1961. The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and the evils of racism. That's speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Board, March 30th, 1967. I imagine you already know that I am much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. Like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. Letter to Coretta Scott King, July 18th, 1952. And one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about the broader distribution of wealth. And when you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. That's speech to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Atlanta, Georgia, August 16th, 1967. We are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. There must be better distribution of wealth in America, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. 1966 speech to his staff. You can't talk about solving the economic problem of the Negro without talking about billions of dollars. You can't talk about ending the slums without first saying profit must be taken out of the slums. You're really tampering and getting on dangerous ground when you are messing with folks then. You are messing with the captains of industry. Now this means we are treading in difficult water because it really means that we are saying that something is wrong with capitalism. Speech to his staff, 1966. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles will not solve their problems. And I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes about most meaningfully through nonviolent action. But they ask, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without first having spoken clearly against the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys and for the sake of this government, for the sake of the hundreds of thousands of trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. That's Dr. Martin Luther King, April 4th, 1967. We must recognize that we can't solve our problem until there is a radical redistribution of economic and political power. This means a revolution of values and other things. This means we must see that the evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism are tied together. You can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. The whole structure of American life must be changed. America is a hypocritical nation, and we must put our own house in order. 1967. Somehow this madness must cease. We must stop now. I speak as a child of God and the brother of the suffering poor of Vietnam. I speak for those whose land is being laid waste, whose homes are being destroyed, and whose culture is being subverted. I speak for the poor of America, who are paying the double price of smash hopes at home and death and corruption in Vietnam. I speak as a citizen of the world as it stands aghast at the path we have taken. I speak as one who loves America, and to the leaders of our own nation. The great initiative in this war is ours. The initiative to stop it must also be ours. April 4th, 1967. He says, I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed matter of a guaranteed income. The curse of poverty has no justification in our age. It is socially as cruel and blind as the practice of cannibalism at the dawn of civilization, when men ate each other because they had not yet learned to take food from the soil or to consume the abundant animal life around them. The time has come for us to civilize ourselves by the total, direct, and immediate abolition of poverty. That's from his book, Where Do We Go From Here, 1967. If America does not use her vast resources of wealth to end poverty and make it possible for all God's children to have the basic necessities of life, she too will go to hell. Speech at the Bishop Charles Mason Temple, Church of God in Christ, March 18th, 1968. I think we've got to see that a riot is the language of the unheard. And what is it that America has failed to hear? It has failed to hear the economic plight of the Negro poor and has worsened over the last few years. That's from his 60-minute interview, 1966. These are revolutionary times. All over the globe, men are revolting against old systems of exploitation and oppression. And out of the wounds of a frail world, a new system of justice and equality is being born. The shirtless and barefoot people of the land are rising up as never before. The people who sat in darkness have seen great light. And we in the West must support these revolutions. April 4th, 1967. Yeah, I could keep going, but that's Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those are his words, you know? There's a reason he was shot down and murdered in 1968. And you think about all of these things. Sometimes I get on here planning to make a great big speech, and other times I just want to come on here and speak from the heart and kind of reflect. I reflect about how I was listening to the musical Hair when I was a teenager and trying to make sense of what had gone on. And I think about all the time I've spent in socialist and communist circles, trying to promote anti-imperialism, trying to build a movement that works. I think about what happened, the different phases the Black liberation movement went through. I think about all the lies that were told. I think of how we're constantly trying to get a bigger picture, just a bigger picture, a bigger understanding. I think about all of that. It's important to reflect, to figure out where you came from and where you're going. That's what I'm on here talking about tonight. A lot of important things are in the works. This conference that we're doing is going to be really, really awesome. And the Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. We're open to new ideas. We're innovating. We're questioning old narratives. I'm excited about the prospect of peace on the Korean Peninsula. Excited about the prospect of peace with Russia and China. Excited about the prospect of going out and organizing and building an anti-imperialist coalition in the United States to revive the city-building tendency. We're doing something really special with CPI. I'll just say this. And if we were just doing the old thing, right? We were just doing the same old thing that communists have been doing in the United States, it wouldn't be special. I was telling people today, I remember years ago, I was out selling a newspaper. It was the newspaper of the Revolutionary Communist Party. I was selling their newspaper when I was 19 years old. I went to go sell them a newspaper, and they said, "Are you from the Communist? Is this newspaper from the Communist Party?" I said, "No, the paper's from the Revolutionary Communist Party." And he said, He's like, "Well, maybe somebody should start the Super Revolutionary Communist Party or the Super Ultra Revolutionary Communist Party." And I mean, it's funny. It's actually a pretty good joke because it's like that's kind of what we got. That's kind of where we're at with American communist groups. It's like, are you in the Communist Party? No, I'm in the Revolutionary Communist Party. Yeah, well, I'm in the Ultra Revolutionary Communist Party. Yeah, well, I'm in the Super Duper Ultra Revolutionary Communist Party. Yeah, well, I'm in the Super Internationalist Workers Revolutionary Combat Marxist Party. That's kind of where we're at. And this is just silliness. It's just a joke. It's just a joke. It's a JOKE joke. And if we just keep doing the same old stuff, and if we keep acting that way, we're going to be a joke as well. No, we're not a joke. Jokes don't send election observers to Nicaragua. Jokes don't have conferences that Newsweek feels a need to comment on. Jokes aren't able to reboot their organization as rapidly as we have. And we have done so much in such a short amount of time. But we're doing it because of our name. We are the Center for Political Innovation. That third word, innovation. Innovation. What does that mean? It means we're not stuck in a rut. We're innovating. Means we're innovating. We have our educational manual. This is the hard copy version of it. We are city builders. If you read it, it's about so much more than socialism versus capitalism. It's about so much more than opposing Western imperialism. We are the city building tendency. If Julius Caesar was alive today, he'd be part of our movement. If Jesus Christ was currently on the earth, I think that he would be part of our movement. We're part of something much, much bigger. Much, much bigger. Much, 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 much bigger than just a 20th century war between capitalism and communism. We're about so much more than that. And communism in the 20th century had its flaws. The Soviet Union fell. Communism adjusted. And the communism of today is not the communism of the 1930s or the 1950s or even the 1970s and 80s. The communist world has innovated. And communists around the world have got to innovate as well. Communists in the United States have got to innovate. And we're doing something so much bigger than just, we're not starting the super ultra revolutionary Communist Party. We don't think that we have the exact true interpretation of Mao and Enver Hoxha's teachings, that if only you apply it, everything will be fine. We're doing something different. And that's why we're relevant. And if you're not relevant, and you're not attached to really existing social forces, then you're lost. That's the point. That's why Marx endorsed Lincoln. That's why the Communist Party entered the Roosevelt coalition. If you're just sitting there, and you're not attached to anything real, you're not attached to real social forces, you're not going to accomplish anything. We need to do what the Communist Party set out to do back in 1948, which was to build an anti-monopoly coalition. Because we're finally in a period now where a real anti-monopoly coalition could be built. That was what the communists during the Cold War, that was the orientation they had. Their job was to build an anti-monopoly coalition, to unite all the forces that would be against the big monopolies in the war machine. An anti-monopoly coalition. That's what they set out to build. That's what we ought to build. We ought to build an anti-monopoly coalition. All the forces that are against Amazon, all the forces that are against Walmart, all the forces that are against the Pentagon, that don't want a new war, that want the economy of the United States to boom again, all the big monopolists that are trying to save the country with degrowth, trying to drive down living standards, trying to destroy countries around the world, trying to grind the American working people into poverty, got to be repudiated. And all of us who want growth and human progress and development, an end to these wars, a new global order based on win-win cooperation, we got to come together. We need to build an anti-monopoly coalition. That's what William Z. Foster talked about. That's what Gus Hall talked about. An anti-monopoly